when a dismissive avoidant and you both stop contacting each other. Here's what happens next. It starts with silence, the kind that isn't loud or dramatic, just empty. Two people both wounded in their own way, both protecting themselves in different styles of pain, finally stop reaching out. The calls end, the texts fade, the pull and push cycle, the endless dance of connection and retreat, finally collapses into nothingness. And at first you think this silence is the end, but for both you and the dismissive avoidant, it's not the end. It's the beginning of something deeper, something uncomfortable and something revealing. Because when two people stop chasing, what's left isn't peace, it's truth. When a dismissive avoidant stops contacting you, it's rarely hatred or indifference. It's usually control. They believe that by staying distant, they can avoid vulnerability, avoid rejection, avoid feeling the old wounds they buried for years. But when you stop contacting them too, something in their carefully built emotional armor begins to crack. At first they feel relieved. Finally, they think, no more pressure. But as the days pass, that relief transforms into curiosity. The silence they once used to protect themselves starts echoing back at them. They wonder, why isn't this person chasing me anymore? For someone with a dismissive avoidant attachment style, connection has always been a battlefield. They crave intimacy but fear it. They want love but associate it with being controlled, trapped, or hurt. So when you used to reach out, when you texted, when you checked in, when you tried to keep the bond alive, it reinforced their sense of security. They knew you'd always come back. But when you stop contacting them too, the power dynamic shifts suddenly. They're not the one being chased, they're the one wondering what happened. And that confusion, it's the beginning of their inner conflict. You, on the other hand, go through your own wave of emotions. At first you feel the ache of missing them. The habit of reaching out is still strong. You catch yourself checking your phone, wondering if they'll finally message, wondering if silence might pull them closer. But then something changes. After the initial pain fades, a strange calm takes its place. You start realizing how much emotional energy you used to pour into trying to maintain something that wasn't mutual. And the silence that once felt like punishment now starts feeling like protection. You begin to reclaim yourself, piece by piece. But here's where things get interesting. The avoidant notices the shift, even without contact. They may not consciously admit it, but energetically they sense that you're detaching. That emotional cord they were so used to tugging at for validation suddenly feels weaker. And that triggers something deep in them. Fear. The same fear they've been running from their entire life, the fear of being forgotten. Avoidants like to believe they don't need anyone. But when the person who once cared finally goes quiet, they start feeling the very abandonment they tried so hard to prevent. At this stage, they might not reach out directly. Instead, they start testing the waters. They might view your stories, like your old post, send a random meme, or show up suddenly in your digital world, hoping to see if you'll bite. Because while they won't risk vulnerability, they also don't want to feel replaced. It's their way of saying, are you still there? Do you still care? But here's the paradox. If you respond too quickly, they retreat again. If you stay detached, they start spiraling in confusion. This is the emotional tug-of-war that begins once you both stop contacting each other. Time, however, becomes the great revealer. After weeks or even months of no contact, both of you begin to see yourselves with more clarity. You begin to see how much you were driven by emotional need, the need to fix, to prove your worth, to earn love from someone who was never fully open. The avoidant begins to feel the weight of their own defenses. The quiet forces them to sit with feelings they've long avoided, loneliness, regret, and the realization that love requires vulnerability, something they've been running from their entire life. For some avoidants, this silence becomes unbearable. They may start reminiscing about the connection, idealizing it, remembering the warmth you gave them, the emotional safety they didn't know they needed. But pride keeps them frozen. They'll convince themselves they're fine, that they've moved on. Yet late at night, when the world is still, their mind drifts to you. They replay moments, your laugh, your kindness, your patience, and feel a strange ache they can't label. That ache is recognition, not just of you, but of what they lost through their fear. Meanwhile, you start growing. You realize silence doesn't have to mean loss. It can mean freedom. You stop obsessing about their next move and start focusing on your healing, your boundaries, your emotional peace. You realize you don't need closure from them because silence is closure. It's their way of showing you what they're capable of giving and what they aren't. And in that realization, something powerful happens. You stop craving their attention, and you start valuing your own energy. Months down the line, when both of you have been silent for too long, something shifts again. The avoidant may reappear, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. Maybe a, "Hey, how have you been?" text, maybe a random comment on social media, or sometimes a full-blown confession masked under casual words. But it's never truly about small talk. It's about testing if the door is still open. Because deep down, even avoidants crave emotional safety. They just don't know how to create it. When they sense you've moved on, it stirs their deepest insecurity, that they pushed away someone who actually saw them. If you respond from your healed space, you'll notice something different. Their charm still exists, but it doesn't hook you the same way. Their distance no longer feels mysterious, it feels predictable. You see their patterns clearly now, and you understand that love cannot bloom where fear still rules. And that's the moment you truly gain power. Not by ignoring them, but by understanding them, without needing to fix them. Because the truth is, healing doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it means recognition, seeing the pattern for what it was and choosing peace over pain. And here's the twist most people don't expect. When you finally stop reaching out, not as a tactic, but as a natural act of self-respect, that's when the avoidant feels your absence most deeply. Your silence becomes louder than any message you could send because it's no longer about punishing them, it's about finally breaking free. And nothing disturbs an avoidant more than realizing the person who once chased them is now completely emotionally indifferent. In some cases, this silence becomes the mirror that wakes the avoidant up. They start confronting their own attachment wounds, questioning why intimacy feels like suffocation, and why love always ends in withdrawal. It doesn't happen overnight, but sometimes your absence becomes a spark that begins their journey toward healing. For others, however, they double down on avoidance, diving into work, distractions, or new relationships to avoid feeling the void. But that emptiness always catches up because no distraction can fill the silence left by unresolved emotional truth. So when you both stop contacting each other, what really happens next isn't just about who breaks the silence first. It's about who grows through it. For you, it's the awakening of your self-worth. For them, it's the confrontation of their fear. Sometimes the silence brings reconciliation, but only when both have evolved. Other times, it becomes a sacred ending, a quiet closing chapter that finally frees you both. And if you ever wonder whether they think of you, the answer is yes. But the more important question is, do you think of you? Because the moment you stop obsessing over their absence and start filling your own life with presence, you win. The silence between you becomes not a graveyard of love, but the birthplace of your emotional freedom. So if you're in that quiet space right now, wondering what happens next, remember this. Silence doesn't destroy connections. It reveals which ones were strong enough to survive without chasing. The phantom presence. What happens next is a strange reversal, where absence becomes more powerful than presence. For the avoidant, your constant pursuit, though overwhelming, was a predictable variable. It was something they could manage, push against, and define themselves in opposition to. But your silence creates a void they cannot control. This void isn't empty. It's filled with what they now perceive as your phantom presence. In the quiet moments they once craved, they now feel the echo of your absence. Your laughter rings in rooms where you no longer sit, and the warmth you offered becomes a ghost that haunts the cold independence they fought so hard to maintain. This phantom version of you is often idealized. Without the pressure of real-time intimacy, the avoidant's mind is free to romanticize what they lost. They remember the safety, the validation, and the genuine care, stripped of the perceived threat that came with it. They aren't missing the real you who had needs and emotions. They are missing the perfect, non-threatening comfort your phantom presence now represents. This is why their attempts to reconnect might seem out of the blue. They aren't necessarily reaching for you, but for the ghost of you they can't seem to shake, trying to see if the phantom can be made real again, just for a moment, to quiet the unsettling hollowness. Meanwhile, you experience this phantom differently. Initially, it's a painful reminder of what's missing. But as you heal, you begin to see that the space they occupied was filled less by them and more by your own hopes, energy, and projections. You realize you were in a relationship with potential, with a ghost of who you wanted them to be. As this clarity dawns, you stop trying to fill the void with their memory and start reclaiming it as your own sacred ground. The phantom of them dissolves, replaced by the solid, vibrant, and undeniable presence of your own self-worth. The mirror effect. After the energetic dust from the push-pull dynamic settles, the silence that remains becomes a mirror. For the first time, both of you are forced to look at your own reflections without the distraction of the other's actions. It is in this stark reflection that the true patterns are revealed. For the dismissive avoidant, they are left alone with the one person they have always tried to outrun, themselves. The mirror reflects a history of self-sabotage. Without your chase to blame for their retreat, they are confronted with the undeniable pattern of their own behavior. They see how they equate intimacy with entrapment, how they create distance not as a response to you, but as a preemptive defense against their own deep-seated fear of being engulfed or abandoned. The narrative of "they were too needy" or "it was too much" begins to crumble, replaced by the terrifyingly honest question, "Why do I always push love away?" For some, this reflection is too painful, and they will shatter the mirror by immediately seeking a new distraction. For others, it's the beginning of a slow, reluctant, but profound journey of self-awareness. For you, the mirror is just as revealing, but it offers empowerment. You see the reflection of someone who is willing to work twice as hard for half the love. You see your own patterns of seeking validation from someone who was incapable of giving it, of mistaking their emotional crumbs for a feast. You recognize how you abandoned your own needs to accommodate their fear, becoming an emotional contortionist to fit into the tiny space they allowed. Seeing this reflection isn't about shame, it's about liberation. It's the moment you stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start affirming, "I deserve more than this." You stop seeing their unavailability as a challenge to be conquered and see it for what it is, a limit you can no longer live within. This is the point where you truly take your power back, not by getting them to see you, but by finally seeing yourself.